Hey, what's going on, guys? Kalamazi here, and this is going to be my Shadowlands Castle, I guess pre-patch, Castle Nathria Warlock overview. Now, it's currently September 16th at about midnight here, and I have been debating making this video for a week or so. I've been getting an insane amount of questions on YouTube, on Twitch, Twitter, basically everywhere. What's the best spec in Castle Nathria for Warlocks? What are you going to play here? What are you going to play there? Well, when the raid comes out in 2.5 months, I don't know what it's going to be the best spec in 2.5 months. But I wanted to make this video today and talk about what I feel the best spec is on each fight currently, September 16th at 12:17 in the morning. Now, obviously, like I said, things can very well change. There's most likely going to be a new beta build tomorrow, and there could be a handful of buffs to Affliction or nerfs to Destro or buffs across the board. Who knows? So I want you guys to be aware of that this video might not necessarily be as accurate as it seems to be right now when Castle Nathria goes live. With that being said, we're going to talk about Affliction, Demonology, and Destruction, their strengths, their weaknesses, and just what they bring overall as a whole to each individual fight in Castle Nathria. I'll start off with a rundown of how each spec works. For the most part, we're just going to be taking Necrolord for every spec here. It's the best, for the most part, for Aff and Destro right now. I feel, and Demonology doesn't really have one because nothing synergizes with Demonology like everything else in the game. So, any weak auras, profiles, or add-ons you see here are available to you guys for free on my Twitch. There should be a link down below. Feel free to swing by, grab them, drop a follow, ask any questions anytime. So, let's get into, I guess, the individual spec overview, and then we'll get into each boss. Oh, I'll have timestamps in the description as well for each individual boss. So, let's get into that. Okay, so the first spec that I want to start off here with is Affliction. Now, Affliction is the spec that's gotten the most changes in Shadowlands. We basically swapped our Soul Shard Spender from being Unstable Affliction in BFA to Malefic Rapture in Shadowlands, which I feel as a whole is a significant upgrade for the spec's overall toolkit. Affliction, I would say, its strength as of right now in Shadowlands, it's our premier funnel spec. Unlike BFA, where you have Flashpoint, Rolling Havoc, all those things for Destruction, making it arguably pretty much just our best funnel spec. That huge intellect buff that you have from Rolling Havoc, the haste from Flashpoint, funneling all into one target with Supremacy, Dark Soul, Infernal stacking is really OP. That's gone in Shadowlands. Affliction's basically taken that spot. As mentioned, we don't have Unstable Affliction stacking anymore. Our main Soul Shard Spender is Malefic Rapture, but the main power source of Affliction, at least at this current point in time, revolves around being a Necrolord with Decimating Bolt, taking the Drain Soul talent here, and just dealing an insane amount of Drain Soul damage, also thanks to the Malefic Rapture legendary here. Now, single target wise, this is, I feel, more or less going to be the spec we want to play at this current point in time. It's just the best suited for it. This legendary brings an insane amount of damage with Drain Soul. The baseline Drain Soul talent, the 75% damage amp that this gives Drain Soul when casting 3 Raptures in a row, plus the extra 200 to 400% damage amp that Decimating Bolt also brings the Drain Soul. It's incredibly impactful, probably about 20 to 25-ish% of our damage, single target-wise, outside of Execute. When you hit Execute, Drain Soul's damage is also increased by 100%, which is utterly insane. It's incredible. It's about 70% or so of our damage, pure single target wise. I remember in Shriekwing testing last week, the boss came back out of intermission like 7% health. I just cast Bolt and Drained. I didn't bother putting up any dots. When your Drain Soul's hitting for 20k, critting for 20k on each periodic tick, and it has 4 to 5 over 1 drain cycle, and Bolt buffs that whole drain, there's no point in doing anything else. It's that good. No class in the game will touch us and Execute when we have all those damage amps across the board. As far as our single target build goes, mostly Siphon Life, Singularity, Haunt, and Dark Soul I feel are going to be the go-tos here. If you're looking at a council-based fight, something like that, you might go towards the way of Absolute Corruption, Dark Caller potentially, maybe Vile Taint, depending on ad spawning or the frequency of the bosses being stacked, and just going from there. The first row here doesn't really change a whole lot. Drain Soul is just that impactful. Nightfall was changed, a stealth buff, I believe last build, to stack to 2 now, which is something, but it's still not where you want to be, and ID, even after the buff about a month ago, is still pretty undertuned. So I'm looking currently at Affliction being mainly our single target spec in Castle Nathria, and our large spread council-based cleave spec. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to each individual fight, and I'll give a talent breakdown there as well. But let's get to Destruction. So at this current point in time, Destruction, I would say, is certainly less impactful. It's weaker than Affliction single target wise. Roaring Blaze is a powerful single target talent, buffing Conflagrate, Immolate, Incinerate, Rain of Fire, Channel Demon Fire if you take it. However, The strengths of Destruction, I feel more so revolve around Reign of Chaos, Soul Conduit, Fire and Brimstone, or Inferno, and just the massive AoE damage profile that it brings. There's also a legendary effect, which is called Wilfred's, basically. It's the Wilfred's Ring from Legion, if you remember back that far. Basically, see if I can find it here. Basically, it reduces the cooldown of... Let me see here. There we go. Let's swap this around here briefly. It reduces the cooldown of Summon Infernal by 2 seconds for each soul shard that you spend. Chaos Bolt costs 2 soul shards. Rain of Fire costs 3. So in a heavy AoE scenario, something like a handful of fights, which we'll get to in Castle Nathria, this build is exceptionally powerful. We've seen a lot of this power in Mythic Plus already, giving you a 1 minute, sub 1 minute Infernal if you're pulling large, making a large pull, a bit of downtime in the next pull, and then you go again with your next Infernal. This build is incredibly powerful. The CD reduction on Wilfred's is hands down the most beneficial for Destruction. Demonology and AF, it doesn't really matter. Mainly AF being Dark Lyris garbage damage, and Demonology, you get a 0.3 second reduction on Wilfred's for each shard spent. It's not that big of a deal. When it comes to Destruction, however, you can spend shards pretty quickly by casting Rain of Fire, by casting Chaos Bolt under a haste amp, like I said, and things get pretty crazy when you're playing Fire and Brimstone, which is also buffed by Decimating Bolt's damage amp. The cleaved Incinerates will hit harder, even with the 40% CD reduction on them, while generating you more shards. Now, there is a bit of play for Inferno as well. It depends where you're going to end up here, but the insane shard generation you can get on a handful of fights with ad wave spawning frequently with Wilfred's, Reign of Chaos, Soul Conduit. This build is exceptionally powerful in a handful of fights, and certainly I feel we're going to be leaning a bit toward in Castle Nathria on a couple of fights. Let's talk about Demonology here, though, before we get too far into, I guess, what spec I feel is best for each fight. Let's just get this out of the way. Now, when I say get this out of the way, I want you guys to know and feel that I enjoy playing Demonology. However, I enjoy killing bosses and not being a hindrance to my raid when it comes to progression. I don't raid on a world first level. My guild Temerity is a Hall of Fame guild, but still, when it comes to your guild having a relatively high goal, Hall of Fame, something along those lines, you want to play the best spec on each fight. And if that's the case, unfortunately, you're not going to be playing Demonology at any fight this tier whatsoever. This spec is not good right now. So, it goes a bit deeper than tuning. Now, Demonology's main strength is single target damage or stacked AoE-based cleave, which is one of the reasons why it's pretty strong in Mythic Plus. For the most part, you have that stacked cleave or that single target damage for bosses, trash packs, whatever, what have you. The issue is, and this has been the issue even before the Demonic Consumption stealth nerf we got 3 weeks ago, Demonology's damage before the nerf with Consumption was exceptional when you popped your Tyrant. You would out DPS, outburst probably almost any class in the game, including Affliction or Destruction, over a sustained period of time. Marksman Hunters might burst to 40k in for a second or two, but you're going to burst pretty high for 15-ish seconds when your Tyrant's active. The issue is, when your Tyrant expires, your damage is terrible. It was the worst damage in raid testing out of anybody in the group. We were below the Shaman before they got nerfs. We were above the tanks. The throughput Demonology has is not even there. It's just not there. The nerfs to Consumption, for the most part, were justified. And that's single target, by the way. The nerfs to Consumption, for the most part, were justified because it dealt an incredible amount of damage. The issue was we needed a buff before the Consumption nerfs to sort of compensate for our damage outside of our Tyrant. Yes, it's a 1.5 cooldown, but it's not going to prop up our damage single target-wise, sustainability-wise. I think the easiest fix for Demonology outside of our Tyrant is just buff Wild Imp damage. I'd be surprised almost if they don't, because I sort of feel like the Consumption nerf was there to see how things are, and then hopefully Demonology will be buffed. The bigger issue, though, with Demo, even in the first place, is that when it comes to raiding, we don't typically have a whole lot of patchwork fights in a raid. We actually have 4 this tier out of 10 bosses, which is really surprising. But even with that being the case, Demonology's toolkit being really limited to basically single target or stack cleave in a raid, which we don't see very often outside of like Zakul or a handful of fights last expansion where, well, I guess BFA, where Demonology was played because of that. Our single target damage is still terrible. It's the worst out of all 3 specs right now. It goes AF, Destro, and then Demo. And the fact that Demonology can't really do anything when it comes to spread, cleave, council-based cleave, just hinders the spec even further. Now, I think that's just sort of based around how the spec's designed. how its toolkit works with each other, you don't really have a whole lot of reach. Doom hasn't been taken in 3 expansions. Even if it was, one dot being Doom, you're not going to beat an AF lock. You're not going to beat a Destro lock. Destro's the best 2-target spec in the game when it comes to cleave, and AF is arguably the best dot class in the game right now, heading into Castle Nathria. So my hopes for Demonology, I want you guys to know that I like playing Demonology. My hopes for Demonology are that we get some substantial single-target buffs, and we end up playing it on a handful of fights this tier. But at this current point in time, I just don't see it seeing any play whatsoever on any fight in Castle Nathria. Starting off with the first boss in the raid, Shriekwing. Shriekwing is one of 4 bosses in Castle Nathria that are patchwork, meaning they're essentially single-target bosses. They really are. There are no adds on Shriekwing on LFR, Normal, Heroic, or Mythic at this point unless the fight ends up changing. Now with that being said, our choices here basically are Affliction or Destruction, and I think Affliction certainly gets the nod here over Destruction. This is a relatively mobile fight. There's a lot of movement with the Blood Lantern, with Blood Pools, with the Sonic Disc that he puts out. So the normal build of Drain Soul, Siphon Life, Phantom Singularity, Haunt, and most likely Dark Soul Misery in the final row here are what I'm going to be looking at playing initially at this point on the fight. Now, depending on timing and things, you might be able to squeeze in another full set of CDs before he pushes to intermission. I imagine the longer this fight goes on, more so meaning the longer the tier goes on, you can push this boss before 2 intermissions and maybe even 1 depending how gearing goes. But with all the movement on this fight, the random RNG movement depending on if you get debuffs or not, and the RNG of Disc in the second phase, I think Affliction certainly gets the nod here over Destruction, both CD-wise, Legendary-wise, timing-wise, and just what it brings to the fight. Decimating Bolt, Malefic Wrath, the Rapture Legendary is incredibly strong here, and if you can get the boss in the execute range with Drain Soul, your damage is truly incredible. Affliction gets the nod over Destro on Shriekwing, in my opinion. Huntsman Altimor is the second boss that you're going to encounter in Castle Nathria, and is basically a permanent 2-target cleave fight. You're going to have Huntsman Altimor active for the entire duration of the fight, and then 1 of 3 dog, bear, werebear, I don't know what kind of ads he spawns on this fight, giving both Destruction and Affliction a pretty good chance at being... they're both solid here. I think this might be one of the fights where Destro is actually a bit better than Affliction, because one of the strengths of Destro is that it is the king of 2-target cleave, and basically, well, whenever your Havoc comes off CD, it's going to pretty much be going back on CD. Also keep in mind that Havoc's duration was increased by 2 seconds in Shadowlands from where it is in BFA, allowing you to squeeze in 3 to 4 Chaos Bolt casts pretty easily in every Havoc window. Now, a big thing on this fight is also taking into consideration Decimating Bolt's damage amp. Now, in raid testing here, timing-wise, it lined up pretty well to be coming back off CD when the dog, bear, whatever bosses were pretty low on health here, which gave us a substantial damage amp to Incinerate or Drain Soul, depending on what spec we were playing here. If you're playing Destro, the build I look at most likely would be Flashover, Entropy, Cataclysm, Roaring Blaze, and probably Dark Soul Instability in the 50 row. It's a bit of give and take with these talents at this point because we have a 3-minute Infernal, unless you're playing Wilfrids and things like that, but I still think it's a pretty strong choice. Having the Roaring Blaze talent here increases fire damage on your target, whichever you conflag on, by 30%. Seeing as how Decimating Bolt increases Incinerate's damage by a certain amount, the damage amp here is pretty impressive, and seeing as how there's a decent chance here you might end up playing the triple conflag legendary on this fight if you end up crafting it and things stay the way they are, you can have a pretty high Roaring Blaze uptime on both targets, and the damage amp here is pretty impressive. Now, the same thing can be said for Affliction if you're playing the Drain Soul, Decimating Bolt, Necrolord damage build here. I'd mostly focus on just playing Siphon Life. I think it's pretty easy to maintain those dots on both targets, even if you're just really rolling Agony on the bear. Although at the same time, AC and Riot could have a bit of potential here. I think it just sort of depends on what we're playing and going from there. They both have a lot of merit though. The dogs giving you that large Decimating Bolt damage amp towards the end of their life every time. It's pretty impactful. This is one of the fights I think Destro could very well end up being a bit better than Affliction, so I'm going to give the nod to Destruction here on Huntsman Altimor over Affliction by a tiny, tiny bit. The third boss we have here is Sun King Salvation. This is where the 70k DPS clip spawned on stream a long time ago. I'm just going to put it simple for you guys here. You can play Affliction on this fight, the Corruption Ring slow effect legendary if you have that, and the multi-dotting is a thing. if things stay the way they are, just play Destruction here. Play Flash Over, Entropy, either Fire and Brimstone or Inferno. I think Fire and Brimstone's probably a little better depending on what your guild's doing and the phase of this fight. Reign of Chaos and Soul Conduit. The build's OP. With Wilfred's in this fight, we had sub 1 minute Infernals in testing all the time. Destruction's not target capped. Reign of Fire is not target capped. Fire and Brimstone's not target capped. Immolation Aura is not target capped. There's no DR on Reign of Chaos. Soul Conduit's insane. The synergy you get with Wilfred's is incredible. Just play Destruction here. This is, in my opinion, probably the best Destruction fight of the tier. It is one of the first 3 bosses, and if things follow suit with how they are for the most part in every raid, the first 3 are probably going to be pretty easy. You can play AF here. My nod, hands down, goes to Destruction on Sun King's Salvation. Number 4, we have Artificer Xy'Mox. Artificer Xy'Mox is the second patchwork fight that you will most likely end up encountering in Castle Nathria, and I think this is going to be a pretty strong Affliction fight due to a few reasons. Playing the normal Siphon Life, Drain Soul, Singularity, Haunt, and Dark Soul Misery build here. I do want to mention, by the way, that Sims aren't done yet, and Soul Conduit does gain value with Rapture comparatively to UA in certain settings, but we'll see where that goes long term. This is a pretty good Affliction fight. Once again, single target, so Affliction is, for the most part, the Ghost dotting them really doesn't give you much merit, and you're not going to get many Destro resources off them either. Single target fight. On Mythic, in the final phase, basically every phase from phase 1, or ability from phase 1 and phase 2, they overlap into the later phases, unless they end up changing the fight, so Affliction's execute damage with Drain Soul here is going to be even more impactful than it may seem with other fights, single target wise, because the final phase is probably going to get pretty crazy on this fight. There's also a decent bit of infrequent, involuntary movement, random mechanics going on you, which push you in a different direction, depending on where you're going, having to kite Ghost around, moving seeds, running in the middle for the large axe that sort of spawns and helps dodging the big AoE. There's a lot going on in this fight, so both for mobility's sake, single target sake, execute sake, Affliction gets the nod here, in my opinion, on Artificer Xy'Mox. Oh, by the way, playing the Malefic Wrath Drain Soul Legendary. Hungering Destroyer is the 5th boss you will most likely end up encountering in Castle Nathria, and just like Artificer Xy'Mox and Shriek-Wing, this is also a single target boss. This is also an Affliction boss, playing Drain Soul, Siphon Life, Phantom Singularity, Haunt, and Dark Soul Misery most likely. There's a decent bit of involuntary, random, RNG-based movement on this fight. It's patchwork. It does sort of seem to be like one of the potentially harder bosses of the tier, depending on how tuning goes for Hungering Destroyer. It could be really hit or miss. It depends on what they end up doing with this boss in its final form, but I think Affliction offers the most here, the most mobility, the strongest CDs, Execute, Drain Soul. That's probably one of the strongest legendaries single target-wise in the Malefic Wrath Drain Soul one as well. Hungering Destroyer, for the most part, I think is a pretty straightforward, simple Affliction fight. You're just not able to generate any real resources. Destro doesn't really bring much here. Like we said before, it's single target damage. It's not bad, but it's just not as good as AF. And when you have to move with a bunch of infrequent mechanics coming at you, AF gets the nod here, once again, over Destruction. Lady Inerva Darkvein is the 6th boss in Castle Nathria that you'll encounter. It is an interesting boss. Both, in the early testing, both Affliction and Destruction were putting up pretty respectable numbers here and being pretty close to each other in damage overall. Now, there are a handful of adds that spawn periodically on the fight, which there's more adds the higher you go difficulty-wise. So on Mythic, what we were able to do as Affliction was pool shards before they spawned, precast Seed of Corruption, Agony on them, all of them, Vile Taint them, and just rapture them all down with the shards that we stored. We ended up playing the normal single target build of Siphon Life, Drain Soul, Siphon Life, Phantom Singularity, actually Vile Taint here over Singularity due to ad spawning. I believe we played Dark Caller here and Dark Soul Misery due to the ad spawning, basically having CDs Dark Caller every other wave. Now to the same extent, Destro could just play the Soul Conduit, Reign of Chaos, Wilfred's Minute Infernal build here, and probably have a pretty similar damage profile. The issue is that unlike fights like Sun King's Salvation, or I believe it's called Stone Legion Generals, which we'll get to in a little bit here, the ad spawn, I believe, every 45 seconds to a minute. The ad waves aren't as frequent as they are in other fights, which gives you a longer Infernal timer. So if you're playing Wilfred's on this fight, things might not necessarily line up as well as Affliction does. So in the long run, I'm going to give Affliction the nod here a tiny bit over Destro. Even though Destro is the king of 2-target cleave, Affliction has a lot of burst damage with Rapture, being able to precast your Seed, Agony the ads, get your Vital Taint rolling, whether you have Dark Lair or not, and just Rapture them all down, also having Decimating Bolts, damage, amp sniping. I give a slight nod to Affliction here over Destruction, but I wouldn't be surprised to see either spec here in high-end progression when things go live. The Council of Blood, or the Dance Boss, is the 7th boss that you're going to encounter in Castle Nathria, and I think through and through this is an extreme Affliction fight. Now, I need to go a bit in depth mechanically as to why I think it's a good Affliction fight and not a good Destro one, so let's do that. Basically on this fight, there are 3 bosses, and when you kill, all 3 are attackable on pull. You can multi-dot them, do whatever you want, and deal damage to them, but when you kill one of the 3 bosses, the other 2 heal back to full health. Now, unlike BFA, in Shadowlands, Destruction does not have Flashpoint. It does not have Rolling Havoc. It does not have any of the abilities that let you generate resources from surrounding ads, similar to what Affliction can do with Agony, Shard Gen, and all that. Rolling Havoc stacks, huge intellect buff. Flashpoint, high haste uptime, and then funnel it into one priority target. We don't have that anymore. Affliction still sort of does it to a different extent with like the Rapture Legendary, but it's Affliction. You can have Agony rolling on multiple targets, more resources, whether you're applying ID, which Inevitable Minds, you shouldn't be on this fight in its current form, because it's undertuned, just generating resources, more shards, more raptures, everything else. Affliction can do that. Destruction can't. So using GCDs for Agony cast on other mobs, or more dots for Dark Lair I-beam damage during that cooldown, is not really wasted, in a sense. Going into a Havoc window on a target that's going to heal back to full, even if you're blasting the main target for full damage, is essentially a wasted CD unless you're generating resources and things like that. What I'm getting at here is Affliction does it so much better than Destro in this fight without really wasting a whole lot of damage. So I think Affliction gets the nod here over Destro. We played the normal Drain Life, or Drain Soul, Siphon Life, Phantom Singularity, Haunt, Dark Soul Misery build here with the Malefic Rapture Legendary. Now I will say that as far as legendaries go in this fight, there's a lot going on. There is a lot going on when all 3 bosses are active. We're getting relatively close to shard capping a good bit of the time. And at times we just did because we had 10 mechanics coming at us at once. This fight is something. So getting full Drain Soul cast off are a bit challenging at times, but even with Decimating Bolt, the damage amp, and maintaining Rapture stacks, even with getting off 3/4 of a drain, or just as much as you possibly can before the CD comes back around and you lose the 3 stacks of the damage amp, is still impactful. Affliction on this fight is a very, very, very strong choice, single target funnel-wise, and certainly my choice here over Destruction in Castle Nathria. Sludgefist is the 8th boss in Castle Nathria, and the final Patchwork boss, the 4th one of the raid. Sludgefist, now, when you hear Patchwork bosses, for the most part, Patchwork in raid boss and Sims implies it's a single target boss over a shorter period of time. You go in there, you burst him down, you kill him. It's a single target rotation. You're not having to account for ads and things like that. Sludgefist is a Patchwork boss, but unlike the other bosses that we've called Patchwork this tier, at least through testing, Sludgefist, like Patchwork and Naxxramas, also hits really hard and has a pretty fast enrage timer on him. There are 4 pillars in the room that whenever he targets somebody with a charge, you have to stand behind the pillar to drag, essentially have him run through it, and it makes him take increased damage for, I believe, 6 seconds or so, give or take a bit. Once you run out of pillars, you're in trouble. If he runs into the wall, I believe the raid takes a lot of damage. It's a pretty intense healing check, and I'm pretty sure he enrages, so it's a pretty tight enrage timetable there. He also hits tanks pretty hard, so this is our Patchwork boss of the tier, the tried and true one. For this fight, normal AF, single target build, Drain Soul, Siphon Life, Singularity, Haunt, and Dark Soul most likely, with Malefic Wrath Legendary here. Now, like I said, this fight is a pretty tight enrage timer. It could, depending on tuning, which this means that Decimating Bolt, Malefic Wrath Legendary, Drain Soul, Damage Amp could be even more impactful, in a sense, on this fight than it was for others. If you're trying to meet a really tight DPS check here, a lot of Execute classes could very well be stacked, as long as they're decent, and Half-Locked Execute is exceptionally strong with Drain Soul, Malefic Wrath, everything that it brings. So, this fight, Affliction single target gets the nod. Destruction just is not there when it comes to single target damage currently, even with Roaring Blades, everything that it has. AF just brings too much to the table, and with there being a lot of frequent movement, having players chained together, needing to move with the ceiling falling, random mechanics, AF gets the nod here over Destro pretty easily. The penultimate 9th boss in the raid is Stone Legion Generals. Now, we've tested this boss a handful of times. The boss has actually seen a pretty big rework in early beta, I believe, from where it was in alpha on Mythic. This boss is certainly something. It does feel like a penultimate boss. So you're going to be fighting General Cal in Phase 1, and then when he hits half health, he goes into the air, you have an intermission, and then the other boss comes down, you fight him one-on-one. He goes up in the air at half health again, and then when that second intermission is over, they both come down, and you fight them together. Now, the interesting thing here is that in all 3 phases, they have an ability called Call Shadow Forces, where they summon multiple adds over the course of the encounter. Initially in testing here, we had played Affliction with Absolute Corruption, Dark Caller, basically our, ad heavy focus kind of build, while also having a bit of priority damage with our Malefic Wrath Legendary. It was pretty strong. After the Rapture changes and things like that, though, and really looking at people discovering the power of Reign of Chaos, Reign of Fire, Soul Conduit, Wilfred's Destro, at this current point in time, I think this is a better Destruction fight than it is an Affliction fight. I've changed my mind on Stone Legion Generals. The ads spawn fast enough that you can get a tremendous amount of cleave value, whether you're playing Inferno or Fire and Brimstone, and then turn that into a 1-minute Infernal. Over the course of the hour we had for raid testing on Mythic, pretty much every single pull, the Destro locks in the raid had a 1-minute Infernal cooldown. Whenever your Infernal comes down, you're cleaving onto more and more ads, which, playing the actual Immolation or a Conduit does give you a good bit of single target damage as well. So I think Destro is going to get the nod here over AF. Even in the final phase, when there are ads present, there's also 2 bosses at once. And hey, Destro is the king of 2 target cleave. Now, AF does have some merit here if you're playing the Corruption Slow Legendary. There is a decent bit of funnel priority damage here. With everything going on, the random wins coming in, ad spawning, having to move out for debuffs and such, your Infernals, Reign of Chaos, Immolation Aura, they just deal so much raw damage in this fight. It's just a really OP build for this. So I actually feel that Reign of Chaos, Soul Conduit, either Inferno, Fire and Brimstone, and Flashover Entropy, the Destro build with Wilfred's gets the nod here over Affliction on Stone Legion Generals. So that brings us to the final boss of Castle Nathria, being Sire Denathrius. Now, normally Blizzard does not test final bosses on Mythic, and they've actually stuck with that for all of Alpha and Beta at this point. We've actually only had one chance to test Sire Denathrius, and that was on Heroic if you exclude the 5 minutes he was up on Mythic instead of Sludgefist, which was a bit of a mistake. But regardless, no one's seen deep into the fight on Mythic. So I played a bit of Destro on this fight and a bit of Affliction, and I can say that I think at this current point in time, Affliction has more utility in the first phase. Affliction playing Vile Taint. We played Drain Soul, Siphon Life, Vile Taint. I believe Haunt and Dark Soul Misery, because we weren't really sure what second and third phase of the fight entail. Well, third we know, depending on Mythic mechanics and things being hidden. We felt that would bring the most utility to the fight. The Cleansing Pain Frontal you have to stand in, which spawns ads around you, Echoes of Sin. Vile Taint lines up exceptionally well with every Cleansing Pain. I believe it's right around the same cooldown as Vile Taint, which gives you time to pool shards, precast Seed of Corruption, Vile Taint, maybe an Agony or 2, and help rapture the ads down really quickly, because they have to die fast. You clear your debuff by standing in the frontal he puts out, and then the ads do a lot of raid damage, so they have to die pretty quickly. Affliction's Toolkit has been great for that. Phase 1 also is a DPS check of sorts. He has to reach, I believe, 70% health before the room is covered in, I guess, blood. You have 4 different waves before the room is covered, and you essentially wipe. Phase 2 is, it seems to be like a multi-target, heavy movement-based phase. I haven't seen a whole lot of it myself, but what we can make out from the Dungeon Journal in the final phase, it is a single-target phase, which favors Affliction a good bit, and depending on how the fight actually ends, Decimating Bolt, Drain Souls, Damage Amp, Execute could be even more impactful in this setting. Now, we had seen a handful of people play Destro with Reign of Chaos and all that stuff. I don't know if Wilfred's out at that point in time, but Reign of Chaos, Soul Conduit, those builds did bring a lot when it came to Phase 1, but the issue is that you didn't have the priority damage that you needed, like Affliction brought to the fight, and we actually missed the DPS check a good portion of the time because people were more concerned with padding on ads, doing irrelevant damage, and not the boss mechanics. Now, we don't know what Phase 2 really entails to an extreme amount, whether the targets are stacked or spread out, or how much movement there is, but looking at how the final phase seems to be like a sort of a quick kill me or I'm going to kill you kind of phase, single target execute based, I think this fight favors Affliction more. Playing Vile Taint at this current point in time, also playing the Malefic Wrath Legendary. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope this video gave you all a better understanding of how Warlock currently looks on September 16th at 12:30 in the morning, heading into Castle Nathria, mainly being mythic content. Now, once again, don't hate me because I said Demonology is unplayable. In the end, I like to play it over every other spec, but I enjoy playing the spec that's going to kill the boss the fastest more than playing a subpar version of Affliction or Destruction. I'm hoping that Demonology does get some buffs, some tweaks, some tuning, and then we end up playing it on a handful of fights. But at this point, with BFA pre-patch being pretty close, and just the overall legendaries being a bit lacking for it, I don't know. We gotta wait and see what happens, but this looks like a pretty big AF and Destro tier. I think Warlock is very well positioned in this tier when it comes to not even just our damage at this current point in time, because AF's already been nerfed, or I guess tuned in a sense, with the Rapture tuning. Our legendaries, our toolkit, just the way our spec interacts, both AF and Destro at this point, with Castle Nathria bosses and how they're laid out is really strong. My pick is Warlock being one of, if not the strongest classes, DPS-wise, mechanically, raid comp-wise, heading into Castle Nathria. Once again, any Weak Wars profiles, add-ons you've seen here are available to you guys for free on my Twitch. If you want to swing by, grab them, drop a follow, hang out, ask any questions you might have anytime. Let me know what you guys think of, I guess, Castle Nathria and just Warlocks as a whole in the comment section below. I'm curious to know how you guys feel. Like I said, go easy on me with the Demonology tuning. It's not me. I don't tune the game. I just play it. I just enjoy it. I try and, I guess, give that back to you guys as well. So, thanks again for watching, dudes. If you guys want to see more content, be sure to smash the subscribe button below, hit that like button while you're down there as well. And I'll catch you guys again soon on stream. Peace.